Hi, I'm Eleanor Kedney, and I want to thank Millie Donovan with the Stonington Free Library for hosting me and helping me through this process. I'm going to be reading from my latest book, 12 Days from Transfer, and I want to share how I had one manuscript and two books. I had a manuscript called 12 Days from Transfer, and the book was a combination of poems about my brother, heroin addiction, how it affected the family, and also infertility and child loss. And I sent it out to different journals that were having competitions, and it was a finalist and a semi-finalist, but it wasn't getting published. And Andrea Watson at Three Atals Press said, "I'll read your manuscript." And when she read it, she felt that the heart of the manuscript really was about my brother. And that press does very focused, themed books. And she said, if you were willing to write a book about infertility, I'll be with you every step of the way. And I want 7 of the poems I'm interested in and the title. So at first I thought, okay, how does that change the manuscript? And how am I going to do that? But I realized I was writing 7 river poems that had to do with addiction. And I thought that they were going to be a chapbook. It was going to be a chapbook. And so I woke up one morning and put those 7 poems into the manuscript. I published the book Between the Earth and Sky in 2020, which is about addiction. It's also a book that I use in my Writing Toward Forgiveness workshop. And I started to work on 12 Days from Transfer. It took me 3 years to write the book. And the focus originally was to just help women who were going through in vitro fertilization not feel so alone and isolated and more understood. But what I found was that the readership, and this is based upon people writing me now who are reading the book, that the readership is much wider. Some of the readers are women who were adopted because their mothers could not have children. Some women decided not to have children but feel the book is essential. Some women who went through infertility treatments and it didn't work, but then later on had a child. Or there have been cases of secondary infertility where women have one, but they can't have another. And then it's been great to hear from men too, who said the book is much more than about motherhood, that it is a universal book that touches on loss and grief. So it's my hope that you will find some of these poems will resonate with you. And what you're going to hear next is the reading that I did at the Stonington Free Library on August 15th. So one of the things that I'm hoping when I read today is that there's all these different categories of people who are talking to me, that the poems resonate for you in some way, depending upon your experience. Then what I technically wanted to create with the book was an older narrator looking back. And one of the advantages of an older narrator looking back is that an older narrator has a perspective that a younger narrator who's just going through something doesn't have. However, I didn't want it to be an older narrator looking back 35 years, which is what I was doing in writing the book. I wanted the poems to feel very immediate, that you're there as if it's happening to this narrator right now, and feel very immediate. And at the same time, I wanted to be able to express a tension in the book between hope, desire, but doubt, fear, loss, but happiness, and acceptance. So I found myself orienting the manuscript to be able to juxtapose all those things. The very first poem in the book, the prelude poem, is about the history of infertility and what women went through. And we've come a very, very long way. And infertility treatments right now are much more successful. However, there's still a lot of isolation. When women are going through that, they're misunderstood. There's a lot of isolation. And so that poem kicks off and ends with a feeling of what the silence feels like when you're going through something alone. And whether it be IVF, whether it be another experience, an illness or something unique, there's oftentimes that feeling that we are alone. The first poem and the last poem in the book has a pair metaphor in it. So I'm going to begin with that and end with it, and then read some other poems in the interim. And take a sip of water here. This first poem is an inversion poem. 3 stanzas, and then the stanzas are inverted, meaning the last, the second, and the first are completely inverted, but also every line is inverted. So if I have the wherewithal when I'm reading, I might just do this so you can know when it switches, but I think you'll hear it. And so it's the womb is shaped like an inverted pear. So there's even inversion in the title. I hold the umbilical stem between pinched fingers, in the air plucked silence. What hangs is enjeu, the you of my cupped hand beneath to catch. Imagine origin, pear tree, full leaf cultivar, seed, fruit, flesh cut, seed. Inverted, womb-like, means grasp, open fingers, means teardrop. Let me see what I never thought of as pear. Dull view, dense flesh, black, gray, white wave rising on an ultrasound, me looking for myself. Let me think of it now, womb as pear, the taste eaten whole, what dangles is core, rootstock. Rootstock, what dangles is core, eaten whole, womb as pear, the taste. Let me think of it now. Me looking for myself, wave rising on an ultrasound, black, gray, white, dull view, dense flesh as pear. What I never thought of, let me see, means teardrop, means grasp, open fingers, inverted, womb-like, seed, fruit, flesh cut, seed, full leaf cultivar, imagine origin, pear tree, beneath to catch, the you of my cupped hand. What hangs is enjeu, in the air plucked silent, between pinched fingers, I hold the umbilical stem. I was getting my hair done, and my hairdresser asked about the book, and then I learned that she had gone through infertility treatments, and she said to me, no one ever said I'm sorry. A lot of things were said to me. Nobody ever said I'm sorry, and I said I have a poem with that in it. And so the second one is called 6 Gray Moons on a Screen. And there's 6 stanzas to this poem. 1, we were name making, Violet for its heart-shaped leaves, Patricia, the name chosen for my brother if he were a girl. My husband wanted April, his mother's hope after 3 sons. If a boy, Ethan, meaning strong, or David, beloved. Shards picked up between thumb and forefinger, far-flung slivers when the month's work of my body shattered. 2, at 12 days, the body flushes hope. The nurse said, you don't have to worry about the embryos. I think of the Flash River near my house, a leaf sprout carried downstream. Hours later, it's sand. 3, an article proclaims heaven is populated by the souls of embryos conceived, unknown, lost in menstrual flow, not mourned, but ours were 6 gray moons on a screen. They said, there's always adoption. They said, God has a plan. They said, it'll happen. Trust me, you're lucky you don't have kids. They said, hang in there. They said, focus on your career. My husband just looks at me and I get pregnant. They said, just relax, go on vacation. Maybe you weren't meant to have kids. They said, you've got plenty of time. They said, you can try IVF again. It's not the end of the world. They said everything but sorry. 5. I saved the quilted yellow picture frame with smiling white whales. 6. We met in a hot tub, a gin bottle in the snow. My husband knew the star clusters, diamond, beehive, jewel box, wishing well, Pleiades, pearl. The mountain trails sloped in the dark. Under the constellation's bright forms, our knees touched, and we danced and sat on the couch, and then went back to our separate rooms. The next poem is a prose poem. It's called Idiopathic Infertility Phenomenon. And another way of saying, although there's some nuances to unexplained infertility, not knowing why. But that wonder, and that happens to a lot of women where they don't know why. You know, everything looks okay, but there's no reason. After blue dye spilled through my fallopian tubes and I reclaimed my pain-shot breath, I walked the neighborhood. It was a hot spring. Ants were building chambers inside their mounds, the upper chamber designed to keep the brood and queen cool when heat thickens and sifted calm. Silent ants scrambled within the mystery of storm. The afternoon, a different silence, an undeterred coming and going, their linear climb, a diagrammed purpose. Your lubes look clear, my doctor confirmed. There are no more fertility tests left to do. As a child, I kicked excavated soil with the edge of my sneaker back into the ant mound. I used to call soil dirt. Dirt is different than soil. Nothing grows in dirt. It has no history. When organic matter or rock, parent material deposits, then ages, soil forms. When it washes away, it becomes a pile of dirt. Ants turn and aerate it. Water reaches plant roots, and the soil building process begins again. Soils lie where earth, air, water, and life meet. My body. The next poem is called Imagine. And I wanted to bring in, you know, the more of the theory of child loss, not just through infertility. Imagine. When Nina had a miscarriage, 5 of us gathered around Sharon's kitchen table. If only we could untie the ribbons of congratulations 2 months earlier. There was a baby, she said, her voice sputtering. This grief imaginable, transferable, a yolk sac, limb marks, heartbeat. Our hands cradled teacups, sandwiches quartered for easy bites, fanned napkins on white plates. Jane brought lilacs from her garden. The morning the infertility clinic called, I let my husband hope another hour that an embryo implanted. He'd be arriving at work, turning on his computer, getting coffee, saying hello to coworkers. The sun still low, a weak light passed over me. My bathroom tide, hands folded on the kitchen table. Outside, heels clicked across pavement. Walkers jacketed by cold air, a stone-still rabbit underbrush, unseen by a passing dog. Did I rest enough? Did I lift something too heavy? A book box, our 32-pound beagle, a jug of water? My husband's A-positive blood type, my B-negative? I needed more body fat on my hips, the heavy-set nurse's hearty echo, eat more pizza. I spoke last in the circle. No one ever asked me about it. Friends, owl-like silence, a bird transformed in a cloak of oak leaves. You look twice at the tree limb, doubt your eyes. Because there wasn't a baby, the counselor said. It was a family imagined. The other childless women, still as cut flowers, faded and reappeared, their blurred edges. My husband and I had stood on the rolling grass, threw pennies into our natural pond. The prior summer, we pressed water lily roots into the good soil below. I have a poem in here called Descending Grace. And then Andrea said, well, you have to write now Ascending Grace. So I have a descending and ascending, but I'll read ascending. This poem agrees. We are made of stardust. The egg that waited in vitro, the sperm that tried to win. Above, perpetual blue and draped willow canopies. Below, soil, granite, ocean, shells. Between, air, spirals, breath, rain. Folded hands, unfolding, fingers reach for you. We made zygotes, you say, dust between the stars. So I know a lot of amazing mothers, and I'm sure some of you are amazing mothers and know amazing mothers. And so I wrote this for a friend of mine, and she's honored in the back of the book, page 60. I brought those little tabs and then I forgot them. So I thought I packed them in my suitcase. This one is called The Lesson. Her voice is full of soft petal wonder. What do you do in the morning? As though every day is a resort of possibilities. Should I book a massage, take out a sunfish or a kayak, sign up for a yoga class, walk the pink sand beach? I tell her the same things as you, make coffee and breakfast, feed the cat and dog, do laundry, shower, work, though she has children, ages 4, 6, 8, and 11. I've imagined having her life many times. The children giggling around the kitchen island, waiting for another pancake. One of them showing me a drawing of a tree. The youngest hugging my leg and looking up. The house in full bloom with them and the wag of happiness. She scrunches her face at how I verbally swept my luxury of time into a corner, made it inaccessible to her. And I want to garner her wide-eyed mothering, each frame a corridor to that fistful word, family. So, and hopefully he was able to get on, but how many well, before I say that, how many people are grandmothers? Yep, grandmothers. Okay, so, and some maybe in the future. So I never thought, because I didn't have children, that I could never be a grandmother. But I had sponsored a couple of children in India when they were younger, and they are now adults. And one of them has a child. And so I am now a grandmother. And I want to read a poem called First Smile. I never understood, like my friends who had grandkids, I thought, well, that's nice. But now I know how much it opens your heart and how different it is to go from thinking about it and then actually being it and wanting to be a part of that child's life and shape that child and add to the richness of their life. So this is called First Smile. And this is a prose poem. Oh, and something to share with you that's so beautiful is that in the beginning of the book is something called the Ashoka chakra that is on the India flag. And what the designer did was every poem that is about the kids in India, the Ashoka chakra is faded out and the first letter of the title is in the center of the Ashoka chakra. So it's pretty special. First smile. The last message of the night was that Madhavi was going to the hospital in severe pain. I lay in bed listening to the small clicks of the clock, knocks through the wall from a neighboring apartment as someone opened and closed an inner door. The heavy quilt pressed on my chest. I dug my heels into the mattress and shifted my legs as my mind bickered with a thought she could lose the baby. Her IVF had been successful. She'd rested for over 8 months. She wants this baby. I got up to work on a jigsaw puzzle, half done on a card table in the living room. A cathedral still needed its steeple, the hill and road unfinished. When my mother was alive, she'd look over my shoulder and say, "That one doesn't go there." I'd forced a piece to fit into another. I looked more closely at the picture on the box. Madhavi's life was not mine. At sunup, I received a photo of Sri Ram smiling, mask below his chin, holding Aravind Krishna wrapped in a gray blanket with white stars, and the words, "You are a grandmother." I studied the newborn face, saw light hover over his closed eyes, small nose and lips. I've never believed in perfection, but I saw him perfectly. I wound his life forward, his good deeds remaking the world. I couldn't stop saying, "He's perfect." On a video call, Sri Ram lifted Aravind, 10 hours old, for me to see him. Madhavi curled asleep beside them. Aravind opened his mouth, closed it, and smiled. "Did you see that? You received the first smile," Sri Ram's words. I thought of the mystery of whether the universe was born spinning and does so on a preferred axis. We can't see outside of it to know for sure, but my wish for a baby was spun into Aravind's smile. I think of it when the light is delicate and dark thoughts rattle the day. I made strong, as if I can climb a tree or jump across a chasm. His Amama. His Amama is it's a Telugu for grandmother, and Aravind's learning English, Telugu, and Hindi all at once. And the last video call we did, he goes, "You're in America." And so he's learning some geography too. "You're in America," and we do namaste, and it's really quite a wonder. So I've been to India, and I'll be going back again next year. So it's time. So I'm realizing I have a final poem, but I'm realizing I could maybe read one more that I didn't choose because I want to make sure I can leave some time for Q&A, but I can do one and then do the final poem. And maybe there's one that would be good for Kata Saritha, the daughter drawn out of water. But I am going back a little bit in time, but drawn out of water, sitting on mats woven from palm leaves by village grandmothers. Lakshmi says in Telugu, "She is your daughter now. I give her to you." Kata Saritha, 19, smiles in her new dress, blue cotton with round sequins like small mirrors. The cloth may have cost a month's wages picking rice, or they may not have eaten for days. Lakshmi hands me a brick of Mysore pak candy cooked over a fire pit wrapped in newspaper. I'm her sponsor. You are still her mother. Our translated words are strung in the air. I think of Jochebed laying her baby in a basket made of bulrushes, daubed with bitumen and pitch so it wouldn't leak, and placing him in the reeds on the Nile to save his life. And the childless Pharaoh's daughter goes to bathe and finds a baby. This is not that leaned ladder. I give Lakshmi a pink bag holding a music box. When opened, it plays Claire de Lune and a ballerina spins. She lingers in the doorway, her hands under her chin in the shape of a V, blowing us kisses. Saritha will live in a hostel, continue school, be given vitamins. The van hobbles through ruts and kicks up dust. I'm your daughter, she says. Don't cry. So we've, let me see, because we do have, I had someone, I debated on whether to read this poem, and then I'll end with the other poem. We'll have plenty of time. It's called My Mother's Hands. It's another prose poem. I never thought of them as slight, though her fingers were long and thin. They defined working hands, peeling 5 pounds of potatoes for potato pancakes, starching a shirt, handing my tired father a glass of milk, or hanging sheets on the pulley line fastened outside our second-floor window to an oak tree across the yard. Her knuckles grew knobs with age, and the thickened cord in her right palm tethered her ring and pinky finger inward. Those were the 2 times I was afraid to let go. Over the years, it was my nimble index fingers and thumbs that cleaned her hearing aids, sorted medications into day-of-the-week pill boxes, and tied the laces on her sneakers. Once, lying in the sunroom together on a twin bed, she reached her arm across my body, and feeling its weight, I pulled away. Touch was a chasm between us, and that moment she cried pries into my memory today, bookended by her lying in a hospital bed and not getting well. I climbed in, circled both arms around her back, held her chest to mine. Her hands smoothed my long brown hair. She loved to unknot and curl into kielbasa ringlets when I was a girl. It was 8 days before I washed it. I was no longer a daughter. How many people have kids off to college that have, okay, kids off to college. Okay, I'll read this one and then I'll do the final one. It's called Rebirth. My friend is rearranging daffodils in a wide-mouth vase, so each orange center eye faces outward, the cup-shaped flowers, pinwheels of joy. Her son got married and moved away, and she feels like she lost a part of herself. I don't know what to do. I want to sleep, she says. Emotions are physical, I tell her. After my mother died, her loneliness steeped in mine throughout the orbit of our lives. I learned to uncork grief in high pitches and wail beneath the quiet. She knows my story. I sat in a bedroom chair, my mother's urn in my lap, asking my husband if there was anything I could do to bring her back, and he said no. After the burial, I slept for 3 days. Watercress on the appetizer plate is another nicety that seems silly and yet a foothold. My body feels heavy, but the sunlight comes in folds through the window and drapes the set table. My friend is happy cooking and serving others food. Though I'm childless, my loss gives hers a nod. So I think whether they go off to college, whether they get married and move away, there's that next, stage of life that feels like a loss. Of course, it's a happy time though too. And then I'm going to end with women pruning pear trees. So the pears come back. That's 86. Sip of water. Women pruning pear trees. When someone in the grief group shared, "Some mornings I don't get out of bed," or "I hate my body," "I wonder if my husband will leave me," "I don't know my purpose in life," I listened, both hands in my lap, left on top of right, palms up. I read aloud newly written poems about autumn rain, apple pie, walking my dog, Shayna. At the end of the 6-week session, Jan invited us to her house to prune pear trees. It was February, snow possible, the weather perfect for cultivating hardiness. She laid the tools on the ground, secateurs, loppers, saws, pole pruners. We thinned out weak crossing branches, keeping the ones with the least angle at their origins. Avoided cutting fruit spurs, removed water spores. We took the dead and damaged limbs, knowing the unsung trees might not fruit that year, but with our work, they might the next. Inside, there was lentil soup and warm bread, a long table. We hung our coats and sat down, joking about who worked the hardest. I rubbed my cold hands together. On my wrist, a small scratch flared. My arms ached from reaching toward the canopy. So that ends with the pears. And 12 days from transfer, the title is It's a Time Between In Vitro Fertilization and Waiting to Know Whether You're Pregnant. And the cover, the book's dedicated to my husband, by the way, who's so kind and always schlepping my books. But also the cover is a photograph by Mila Hogebo, who when she was young was almost drowned, and to overcome drowning, she does underwater photography. So this is a woman that she photographed underwater. Yeah, and I feel like it's an amazing, has a universal feel to it. So now we're opening to Q&A. If people have questions and anything, about the process, about technical things that I did.
And we have a small microphone so that folks online can also hear your question. So if you want to just raise your hand, I can come round.
Hello. It works because it's got it. Okay, so I have to speak loud, like for the real life.
Present, yeah.
Okay. Hi, Eleanor.
Hi.
That was so enjoyable.
Thank you.
Eleanor is one of the best, if not the best, listeners I've ever met. And now I can say you're also one of the best speakers, which makes sense. But it's so nice because when you're reading, you're speaking, I guess, in your own voice. So what a treat to hear the writer speak the words that typically aren't allowed. But my question is, if you could describe I know probably each piece is different, but if you could give some description, of your writing process, like if there's a general process, knowing that sometimes it might be different than others, but in general, what's your process like when you write?
So this was kind of an interesting book to write because it took me 3 years. We were renovating our house in Tucson, Arizona. So I was living sort of in a cramped space in our townhome, and there was a lot of disorder, which I felt at first like, this is just awful. And now I realize that being so preoccupied with things that were physical things that I had to constantly go back and review and focus on, and personalities I had to deal with, gave me distance to write the book. And what I did was I had the 7 original poems and the title, but I started to do some things. Like I would get up in the morning and try to write really early before getting in touch with contractors. And what I ended up doing was writing a poem. And after I got it to not quite finished, I would run it by Andrea, my editor and publisher, and say, what do you think? And sometimes it was yes for the book, and sometimes it was no. And it kept me really on track. And then I wrote one of the poems for the children in India and said, what do you think? Thinking I was off track. And she said, can you write more? That's the thread of the book. And I realized it gives the book a lot of hope. I mean, it just brings in a lot of depth to the book. And she was right. So I started to work on those. And one of the things, and now I've begun another book. And so one of the things I do is I start with an image, and I sometimes carry that image or a line around with me for days. And I might jot down a couple of little things before I actually sit down and write and discover what the poem's about. And then with the other thing that I allow myself to do is to not, to have the poems be emotionally true, but they don't have to be factually true. I will I will change, I'll put somebody in that's not in, I will change a timeline, I will change a description, all to serve the poem. So, that gives me a lot of flexibility to do that, but I stay emotionally true to the poem. And that's what I did throughout the book, but it did take 3 years to write because of and to be honest with you, I after on the back is a blurb by Robert Carr, and I wrote him and I said, Robert, did I write this book? It's like, Eleanor, you wrote this book. Because sometimes I look at it and I go, oh my God, like, where did this come from? And some of that is good, just being, connected to an emotion. But I'll tell you that inversion poem, I hope everybody heard that. Could you hear it? I wrote it. It came right out. I was sitting outside on a patio. It came right out. And I went, I just invented something. And then when I sent it to Andrea, she said, wow. She said, you wrote an inversion poem. Those are hard to do. And I went, what do you mean? I didn't invent that? But it came right out. But that's not normally like how it goes. I mean, you might get what I call a gift line, where if you're truly connected, it's not coming from here, it's coming from your heart. It comes into the poem, and I call them gift lines. There's no way you could have thought of it. So I think that was a gift. Great question. And thank you for the compliment about being a good listener. I appreciate that. Anybody else?
I notice you pick a narrow focus. Mm-hmm. Is that necessary?
For each poem, necessary for each poem, or for the whole book?
The whole book.
Three Atalis Press only publishes theme-based books. Oh, so I was asked to do that, to keep it, as a book on infertility, child loss. And sometimes poems did not make it into the book because they just, took the reader into a completely different, story.
So is that an important subject for you?
Yes. And I'll tell you why. It's an important subject because when I wrote the book, I forgave myself. Like, if you think of the poem, was it too heavy? Did I do this? Did I not try enough? All of that stuff, is self-blame and self-doubt. And after writing this, I was like, and hearing other women's stories and people writing me, I'm like, no, I don't need to do that anymore. It's all here.
How much of your work is autobiographical?
I'd say it's all autobiographical, but what I do, and what I used to teach creative writing, is I create a narrative voice. I create a narrator to tell the story that's not me, the poet, to give me a lot of freedom to move around and access different details. Right. But at the same time, they're all emotionally true. They may not be. Was there a day, and I'll give my secrets away, the one about where I say the poem Imagine, when Nina had a miscarriage, 5 of us gathered, it never happened. It never actually happened. But I have friends close to me that have miscarried, and I've been feeling their pain, and I wanted to be able to talk about how sometimes we think if somebody's pregnant and they miscarry, they deserve our, sorry. But when it's a failed IVF, people just say, oh, you'll try again. Or, oh, they don't see that there's a loss. So I know what I was after, but not necessarily this exact thing happened. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. That's a good question. Anybody else? Yay.
I guess a technical question. I was very interested in your inversion poem, and I was thinking about how difficult that would be to write, not only technically with the words, but thematically and so forth. And so I was going to ask about that, but I had never heard of an inversion poem before. Is it a convention, or
People
you
do.
thought you invented it, but
I
your
did.
publisher seemed to think that it was
Yeah.
actually something.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
that exists.
It exists. Yeah, people do it.
They do it.
And it actually had more stanzas than 3. And I took some out so it could work as an inversion poem, because one of the things I realized is that I like ending on, I hold the umbilical stem. I felt like that was impactful. So I took out other stanzas that, at the time when you're writing, you always think certain things are important, but then you go, it's more impactful if I don't have that in there. And then I had to change the grammar a little bit so that it would read well. And it has these, and I do this in other poems, like it has these 5 spaces, which stands for a little bit longer pause when you're reading, and it gives the poem room. So I looked very much at form after I wrote it. And, so it wasn't just, oh, here it is, and exactly as I wrote it, but.
And if I may ask a question,
Yes.
to echo that a little bit, when reading, cadence is so important to the work. And I know oftentimes the cadence while you're reading will change. How is that maybe different with an inversion poem, because it is structurally so complex?
Right. And I think, well, recently somebody said, sometimes the sound of a word is more important than the meaning when you choose a word. And what I wanted to do here, and what kind of came, is shorter lines. I hold the umbilical stem between pinched fingers, just dot, 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 dot. It was like important to not have, I think if I had long lines, people would have gotten lost. They wouldn't have heard the inversion as clearly. And then there's just surprise, like the wave on the ultrasound, me looking for myself, just to be able to repeat certain things too. And there's a lot of forms out there now with repetition and different things that people are playing with. So, but yeah, I think that longer lines with an inversion poem would be harder. Sibby, good to see you here. Thank you. Let me just say that Sibby, after Christy Max Williams read here, which I attended and love his work, Sibby said, you should read at the library, and encouraged me to go up and say, is there any chance of reading at the library? And it started the process. So thank you. I'm grateful for that.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm sorry it's from this rainy downpour.
I know. We have to just
Anyway,
say.
I got through it. Apparently there was hail too.
Was
I don't know
there?
how to use this, but you can hear me. I just wondered, yeah, there was. Did you write other poems?
Not really. I did write some that didn't make it into the book, that weren't as tight to the theme. And sometimes it wasn't easy to stay with the theme. It's like, I wrote more mother poems, let's put it that way. But some of them except for reading, and I'm glad I read My Mother's Hands, because the idea of no longer being a daughter is also important to this whole process of, genealogy and family. And so some of them really didn't work in the book, but that one did. In Well, interesting. I did in writing Between the Earth and Sky. I used this book for the Writing Toward Forgiveness workshop, and I shared an experience I had with this book. I got to a point where I didn't feel like I could write any more poems about my brother, about addiction. And one day I said, I'm done for a while. I am going to go to the used bookstore and I'm going to look at artwork. I'm going to go look at Monet's Lilies. So I go there, and then up on the ceiling is all the art books. They weigh like 10 pounds, they're big. And the guy, he brought his ladder over to get one down. He goes, well, which one do you want? I said, just pick one. And he picked a book, and I took this heavy art book, sat in one of the comfortable chairs there, opened the art book, and there was a card inside. And it said, sis, in like my brother's handwriting, as if it was my brother's handwriting. I opened the card, and it was an apology. Saying I was hard to live with, and I closed the book and I took the card, and then I had those 7 poems. I was working on a chapbook of the 7 poems, which went into here. And then this year, I always go to AWP, except San Antonio when COVID happened. So I was supposed to read from this book in San Antonio, and COVID happened. I didn't go. So I didn't have a reading. And this year, it was in Kansas City, and my editor said, well, anyone who didn't get to read will read this year. And they put together an offsite reading. AWP is always in March, as far as I can remember. He announces the reading date. They moved AWP into February, probably for, when the convention center was available. And the reading was on my brother's birthday. And yes, the book in the library that he took off the shelf, handed to me, and I sat and I opened, and there was a card that just said sis by someone. And it was a birthday card to the person's sister. That wasn't also an apology. I know that I was hard to live with. I know. I was like very, and I almost, that's the kind of, I think when we actually are connected to our work, those things are natural. But I felt like, especially with my reading being on my brother's birthday, I feel like I'm getting a nod, like this is good, and had worked with this in a group at La Grua Center on Sunday, the Writing Toward Forgiveness, and with a lot of the river poems. But I feel like every time I do that, I'm getting the approval that I'm doing my work, that's my personal work to be bringing the poems out into the world.